you get this understanding of why I need to have small experiments, what it means to have a small experiment, and that the tiny experiment doesn't have to be usable software.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. Hello, I am here today with Ivett Ördög. Ivett, well, I'll let her introduce herself in a minute, but Ivett and I met each other through JB Rainsberger's JBrains Experience, I think it's called, his mastermind type group. And the thing that got me into JB's group, and I'll let you talk about how you ended up there in a second, but I got there through his economics and software development talk. I think that is how I discovered JBrains to begin with. And I was like, wow, I was like, this guy really gets it. Like, that's still one of my favorite talks, and I reference it all the time. So I don't know, Ivett, you want to do a brief introduction?
Yeah, Sam Ivett Ördög, and I've been an engineer for a long time. I was lucky enough to have a father who was a software engineer, so I learned at 8 years old, and then ever since I've been fascinated by building software, and especially the part where people get to use something useful. I don't really care that much about technology. I'm more about what is the end product that people get and how it's changing their lives. That's what motivates me in this area. And then to touching on your point about how we met, so I knew about JB for a long time because I've been facilitating these code retreat events for a while. And then at some point, JB and a couple of people came up with the idea of legacy code retreats. And then I heard about him at that point for the first time because I started facilitating those as well. And then much later, when about 1.5 years ago, I decided to go full time with my own business. And I was really struggling with feeling alone because at that point, I didn't really have clients yet. I still don't have any colleagues that I can afford to hire. So, and working alone was really stressful for me and hard. And then I heard about JB's group. I was like, you know what? If nothing else comes from it, I get to have a couple of people to discuss topics with. And it turned out to have been a really good choice because for the price, it's extremely good value. It's not just that I found a community, but also like JB and a lot of other people in that group are very knowledgeable, and it's always very productive to have conversations there.
Yeah, it's very interesting being there, actually. I feel like when I first started, I needed more technical guidance. And now I feel like he's more like I don't want to say psychologist, but it's definitely, there's a lot of like guidance that's not really technical, more about like managing all the politics and managing all your internal state and like how you feel about things. A lot of it's just changing your perspective, which I find
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, he definitely has a kind of a Buddhist feel to him. He is all about finding ways to not burn yourself out and not get yourself worked up about things that you shouldn't work yourself up about. But I also got a lot of good at business advice from him. So yeah.
Well, I think that tracks with something that I've noticed from him. And I think he said this even, like he used to be when he was very much younger, like want to change the world and change everything and make everything better. And, I know the best way and all this stuff. And I feel like he has this zen about him of like, I'm not going to try to change the world. I'm going to try to change a small part of it. And I'm going to focus on things that I can control. And, I think one of his things he talks about is like helping people in big corporations where you can't necessarily change the corporate culture, but you can change it
Mm.
locally and you can change the way things function in your team and you can make life a little bit better in your tiny corner of the world and then
Yeah.
just try to build from there. And I think
Mm.
that's a good philosophy, because like, things being an quote agilist for whatever that means. I'm into the small incremental change, and that's very much small and incremental, and you can build on it. So
What's interesting is that we talked a lot about this with JB, that we have so much in common in our career, the two of us. One of those things being like he's been this know-it-all guy. You know that you know the type. I think that maybe the person that I most associate with this is DHH. But even he is getting a bit more wiser by now, but like the person who always has a very strong opinion and not held very loosely, and I was that person, and I feel like JB is also coming from that background. But as time moves on, we start to realize that maybe we are not right about everything. And this is one of those things. I think it's in the Little Princess or Little Prince book, that the smartest people are the ones who know that they know almost nothing, and that kind of smartness is that we are slowly acquiring with our age, and then at some point you just realize that you want to have others with the tools that you have, and you don't want to necessarily change the world, and you don't have to have everyone do things the way you do it. I think that's the most important part, like recognizing that it's okay for others to do it, some things differently than you do.
yeah, I'm a big fan of the strong opinions held loosely thing of like I like people
Yeah.
who are passionate and really believe in something, but also like, I believe this is the best way to write software, but it may not work for you, and that's okay. But I'm going to
Yeah.
continue to do what I think is the best way, and I'm going to continue to advocate for it. But like, if you choose not to do it or whatever, that's a
Mm.
legitimate thing, and there might be reasons why it doesn't work too. Because I feel like we lose a lot of the fact that everything we do in software is contextual. And so that if the context changes, if you're working for a giant company versus working for a startup, if you're working in a fast moving industry versus a slower moving industry, like all those things change the decisions that we make, and they should.
Mm.
And that's why I really dislike the people talking about best practices. And it's like, well, no, there is no one best practice. There are good
Yeah.
practices in this domain that work really well over here. And if you're doing that, you should probably follow those. But that doesn't
Mm.
mean they apply everywhere and that there are no other alternatives that work.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said something in your introduction that I want to talk about. You talked about how you're interested in solving problems, and I feel like a large problem in the tech sector in general is what I call solutions in search of a problem. We decide that we can do something, and so we're like, great, let's go do this, let's go build this thing, and then we don't think about like what problem does it solve, and then we build this thing, and then we're like, oh, trying to force fit it into problems. And I know you have some opinions on LLMs, and I feel like LLMs are exactly that. I feel like somebody said, "Oh, we can make this cool thing, and we can make this cool chatbot, but it doesn't
Mm.
solve any problems." And now they're running around trying to find problems that it solves. Do you have any?
It's an interesting point that you're raising there. I think that in general, a lot of engineers have this attitude of, "Oh, I got some interesting technology that I just learned about, and I want to try it and use it." And it's not like I have never had that. Like sometimes I do have like, "Oh, this is cool technology. I want to try it," especially early in my career. Like I remember at one point, it was actually my first uh, job in the industry, and I was coding in C++, and I learned about templates, and that templates are Turing complete, and I started using templates for everything. Oh my God, the unreadable code that came out of that, and and the number of bugs that I had to fix after that. So and what the point that I want to make is that, like, for engineers, this is a fairly frequent attitude of, I like this technology and I want to use it for everything, or at least more than than it actually needs to be used for. When it becomes especially harmful is when that enthusiasm uh, sweeps over into the product management and business side of things. Because normally, with this particular topic, the product manager and the business people should be the adults in the room telling us, hey, don't be so obsessed about the technology. We need to solve problems for our customers. And then when we have one of these hype trains like currently with the LLMs, and before that we had blockchains and
NFTs. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then before that there was something else
Big
like
data.
the dot-com boom was one of those situations where you just had to have .com in your company name to get funded, right? And I think that we are currently in one of these phases where unfortunately the investors and business people and product people got obsessed about the technology, and at this point I feel like they are more obsessed about it than us engineers. Like what I see is engineers are like, oh come on, get over it, it's we already see that it's not going where we thought it was going to be. Like chill down. It's a useful technology, but it's not for everything. You don't need to have AI in sparkling water.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think just so there's another side of that though, too, that just because something's hype doesn't mean it's not useful. And I feel like
Mm.
the engineers and the technologists are more into, okay, here are the places where it's useful, and the business people are like just trying to force it in everywhere. And
Yeah,
yeah, because I mean, I am definitely an AI skeptic, but I have used it and I use it occasionally, like to answer random questions. Like I need to write a bash script to do XYZ and I don't know how to do it. Like that's one of the places that I sometimes look.
I'm
And it can be
extremely
useful in those situations, but
yeah, I heavily rely on AI. Don't get me wrong. One of the things that I do these days is rewriting legacy software using AI, and it's incredible what these tools are capable of. It's just that it's not capable of everything. And then I see folks like Andrea Capati coined this term vibe coding. And a lot
yes.
of people took it as, oh, I don't have to know how to code because now I can just ask AI to code for me. And then and which is fine if you're just doing it for a hobby project.
Mhm.
I definitely all for that. Like if you want to test an idea, be sure, and you can vibe code it and it's okay. But then people started to like put those into production, and of course like they were full of performance issues and cybersecurity issues. And right now folks, if you are registering to a new service, like don't share your real data, don't share your email address, and definitely don't use the same password, because there are a lot of unsafe apps out there right now because people are believing that they can build an app just by using AI, which is like super dangerous at this point.
Yeah, I can see AI being useful for like you said, hobby projects or like rapidly creating a prototype and maybe not something you ever put in production, but just like just to show it to some user and be like, hey, here's an idea I had. Here's what I think it might look like. Is that useful to you? I think that's a useful thing because it can get you to that. It can get you to that point where you have something to show the customers a lot quicker. But I
Yeah.
think it's the classic also the problem of when the prototype becomes the production, right? You build the prototype, you put all this effort into it, you create a prototype, you show it to them, they're like, that's great, let's ship it. And you're like, wait, that's just the prototype.
Yeah. But also, I think with vibe coding, there is this other aspect of who is able to judge the vibes of a code.
Mhm.
Like, if someone is an engineer with decades of experience, I, as an engineer, I can look at the code, read through it like 20 to 30 lines of code, read through it, and say, okay, this is probably I don't need more than 30 seconds to tell you if that's a safe and properly working piece of code. Uh, but for that, you need that experience, and a lot of people don't have that experience, and just don't even look at the code and try to use it. Like I think that it's fine to use LLM generated code in production. Just have that experience to judge the vibes correctly.
Yeah, I don't know if I quite that far, but yeah, I mean, yeah, in a way, I don't necessarily care where the code came from, but I do care about the quality. I care that it's tested. I care that I can prove that it works,
Yeah,
like those type of things. And if you can meet those quality goals by
yeah.
generating LLM stuff, then okay. But yeah,
Yeah, and it's also like sometimes it's easier to write it. Like I actually one of my YouTube videos, I was rewriting the front end for my product. And if you look at that video, like some parts of it are almost entirely LLM generated. Like, for example, the chart that is shown on the dashboard is like, I have no idea how to use chart.js, but I got it out of the LLM. And then once I got the basic structure there, and then I could go in, understand the code fairly easily, and then like fix the like shift pixels and change the colors as I needed. And it was at that point, it was much easier than asking the LLM to regenerate every time and try to fix things that are just easier to change that one word in the code than to explain in 100 words what you want to change.
yeah, a couple issues I've seen. One is like I've seen people write an incredibly long prompt to generate like a two-line function, and at some point, I'm
Yeah,
what are we doing here? That's one thing. And then also like the legacy code part, I'm interested in talking to you more about that because my limited experience has been usually the AI, like you tell it to do one tiny little thing and it rewrites the entire function, which
yeah.
just like why would you do that? And so I'm curious for the legacy stuff. How are you using it? Because I've seen people use it to just like suggest refactorings. I've seen people have it actually do the refactorings. I've also seen people have it write tests. Like how does that process work for you?
Yeah, so it really depends. Like that's the thing. I don't have a strict workflow for that. Whenever I feel like, okay, for example, I want to rewrite a certain part of the app in a different language for some reason, for example, or a different framework. For example, I had this JavaScript front end that was vanilla JavaScript from 15 years ago, really hard to work with. But I was using an API with that code. So what I could do is say to the LLM, okay, here is the old code. I want to rewrite this in React. Extract the API documentation from for me based on this code, and then it can go and understand how that API is being used. And okay, now re-implement this connection in React to that specific database to that specific API. And it can do it really well and much faster than it would have been for me to try and copy paste code back and forth between the two systems.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I being a LabVIEW programmer, LabVIEW does not have very good AI hooks at the moment. So there are a few, and I've looked at them a little bit, but not enough to actually like do anything with them. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
so we were talking about people getting distracted by hyped up things and shiny objects, but I have this theory that like it's I get distracted by shiny objects, but sometimes like in order to figure out if something's useful, you have to actually use it, and you have to learn by actually going and using it.
Yeah.
Because you can sit there and you can analyze it all day, but like ultimately, like how does it actually work when you're using it? So I was thinking that plays into the way that you teach with some of your lean poker stuff. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm very much in favor of uh, learning in practice, right? And I'm not alone with that. Like if you look at the stuff that Emily Beige is doing with the Saman coaching, she's all about just sitting together with the engineers and just showing them how to do things and letting them touch the code and experience the different, like the feeling of writing a test or writing or extracting an interface or whatever. All right. And like science really backs this up. If you look at, there are a bunch of interesting research that shows that if people can actually try something in practice, the likelihood that they will learn it and use it in practice is much higher. And that's kind of something that I really see as a very important point when you are teaching something. Just giving a talk about it is not going to go that far. Where you can really like have a huge leverage is if you can create an environment where people can practice something. And I told you before, we talked about it. Okay, so we talked about this before, that I am really all for getting a valuable software in the hands of users as soon as possible. And when I was first trying to convince people about that specific continuous delivery, and uh, I ran into this issue of people don't really seeing the value that is being delivered by just not planning for weeks and not waiting months before we release a new piece of software, but right, really pushing every change into production as soon as possible and seeing the value out of it. And I really wanted to create that learning experience for people where they can actually learn about about that and experience it for themselves, that oh, this is actually useful when I get this fast feedback from production that is helping me. So that's why I came up with this workshop. It's called Lean Poker, and I'm currently in the process of renaming it to um, Lean Developer Experience. uh, but whichever we call it, the point is that we have teams that are working on poker bots, and these poker bots are playing against each other. Every few seconds there is a game, so it's very high paced, and then people can deploy their new versions anytime. Like they start out with a simple bot that can only just fold, and then as we progress, they can deploy their new versions. And then there's this dashboard with a chart where you can see um, how your team is performing. And when you're not performing as well as the other team, you can actually look at how the bot is playing against the other player, form an assumption around why we are losing to that other team, and then make changes to our code, push it out into production, and see how that changes. And what I noticed that during these events, people are or teams are deploying their code up to 100 or 200 times a day. So this is a really a lot of deployments in a single day, right? It's not what any company would be doing in practice. But when I ask people, okay, if all other teams were allowed to do as many deployments as you did today, and I told you that this one team can only deploy every 30 minutes or every 10 minutes, how would you feel about that? And everyone agrees that it would be unfair, right? So there is this huge advantage that people just understand at a deeper level when they can actually try it, and that's what Lean Poker is all about. Like understanding this huge value that comes from instant feedback from production.
Yeah, it sounds like basically very rapid experimentation.
Yeah. And also like one of the things that you get out of it is people realize what are the things that are not valuable, right? You start you get this understanding of why I need to have small experiments, what it means to have a small experiment. And that the tiny experiment doesn't have to be usable software. It doesn't have to be uh, a full featured solution. It's enough if you can test it with a couple of customers and get their feedback on, yes, this is useful for me. Please complete this feature. That would be enough. And that's what I want to want people to experience this feeling of, oh, I made a small change and people are giving me feedback immediately. And now I know what to build and what not to build. And that basically brings, uh, what I see as a result is teams that have been through a lean poker event usually end up improving on business metrics uh, in the coming months, simply because they get motivated to just weed out the waste that was there before.
Yeah, I'm reminded. I have a friend who's talks a lot about this idea of immediacy of like as soon as you make the change, you see the result and how it makes it a lot easier. Uh, so you mentioned metrics. We've had a discussion or two, or you've had a few posts about metrics. Uh,
Yeah.
I understand doing lean poker. You found some interesting metrics.
Yeah. So, so one of the things that I ran into recently was that I was trying to advertise lean poker, and a lot of the people who like the leads that I were talking to were asking me, okay, but how is this changing how my team will behave, like the performance of my team? How do I know that we got somewhere? And like everyone was looking for a metric, and I was like, okay, let's look at what metrics can be used to actually judge the perform like the effect of lean poker. And then because I had some really bad experiences with metrics, especially early in my career, I used lines of code as a metric to judge if my colleagues were pulling their weight, which is an incredibly dumb way of doing that. But I was young and unexperienced, so I did that, and of course, I burnt myself with that. So the point is that I didn't want to make that mistake, so I wanted to understand what good and bad metrics are, and this ended up being a really really deep rabbit hole that we went down with a friend of mine, Mario, who went in and did a huge research for me on this topic, and then we discussed this for a long time. And it turns out that it's not really the metric that matters, but how you use it. You can use lines of code as a valuable metric. You can use, at the same time, you can have the Dora metrics, which are scientifically founded metrics, and you can use those in a bad way and create a tragedy out of it. So the really takeaway message for me was that it's not the metric that matters, it's more how you use it. And then I read your article, which I think that was a super interesting metaphor that you used there with the medical professionals, and maybe you can explain that, because I'm sure that you can explain better
I
than
mean, I
I
think
did.
to me the key one of the keys with metrics is using them as a dashboard, as an indicator, but not so much as a target, right? Because there's a law like once it becomes a target, it's no longer a useful metric. I think that's like Goodhart's law or something.
Yeah.
But like yeah, in the medical thing, right? Like you monitor like the patient's heart rate and these things, but you can't directly make you're like I want to make their heartbeat exactly 80 or whatever. Like you're not chasing that, but you're like you do something, you do an experiment, you elevate their feet because they're in shock, and you look and you see do their vital signs get better. If they're moving in the right direction, then you're happy.
Mm.
And so it's more about like the rate of change and how it changes over time, and is it moving in the direction that you want, as opposed to like what's the exact value. And also like, you know, the other thing too, we get into metrics where we compare teams, and that's really actually a bad thing to do. Because like, for example, heart rate, right? You think about somebody's heart rate, like an athlete has a naturally lower heart rate, and
Yeah.
and somebody else might have a naturally high. Kids have really high heart rates. The
Yeah.
actual number doesn't necessarily mean as much as like, okay, here's the number now. Are they doing good or bad now? And is the number going up or down? And what does that tell us about their condition? Is it improving or getting? And that's kind of more along the lines of the way that I see metrics, is like it's an it's an indicator of if things are going good or bad, but it's not like on its own, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot. You need all the other information around it. And to your
Eh,
point, like lines of code, yeah,
eh,
but like there's a lot of problems with lines of code. But if you're monitoring everybody's lines of code and one of your employees suddenly their lines of code like drops,
Yeah.
You can look at that and you can say, hey, there's something going on there. I should go investigate. Maybe they've got problems at home. Maybe they moved into a new role and they're just, they're more of they went from being an individual contributor to mentoring people. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't just like look at the lines of code and be like, oh, this person gets a raise because they wrote more lines of code. Like that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that absolutely doesn't make sense. But also, I think that a more interesting interpretation for me from this medical examples is that, like, assume that you have a fever, right? So why does your body have a fever? It's usually because it's fighting an infection, right? Now, imagine a scenario where the doctor's only concern is to reduce your fever.
Mhm.
For some conditions, this is actually dangerous because by reducing the fever, they are actually blocking or making it harder for the body to fight the infection because the heat is there to help with fighting the infection. Uh, so it's not like when you want to reduce the fever, you are not trying to reduce the fever. You are trying to change the reason, like find out what is the reason for the fever
Mhm.
and uh how you fix the root cause. And as a result, you should see the fever going down. But just giving someone a pill that will reduce their fever while not solving the root cause, that is actually dangerous. And that's the same with any metric. If you don't understand what is the root cause for that metric changing, and you try to just fix the value of the metric as opposed to finding the like fixing the root cause, you are going to be disappointed. And that's even true of any metric, even if it's a scientifically founded metric.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that goes to the metric. You shouldn't make the decision based solely on the metric. The metric should be the start of an investigation. So the metric should trigger you that, hey, something's not right or something's not doing what I'm expecting. Let
Yeah.
me go investigate. And like furthering on your medical example, like if you're a doctor and somebody comes in and says my arm hurts, well, like, yeah, sure, I can give you some pain medication for that. But like, what's the underlying problem? Did you break your arm? Are you having a heart attack? Those are two very different things and they require different
Mm.
interventions. And just giving somebody a pain pill doesn't really, it helps the metric, it helps the pain go away. And if you only
Yeah.
grade the doctor on does he make people's pain go away? Well, okay, great. He gave him some Tylenol or whatever, or something more powerful, and great, their arm no longer hurts. Okay.
Yeah, I
But
mean, uh, to that point, I want to say that cyanide helps with any pain, right? so, and actually the reason I brought that up specifically is because early in my career I was working in a drug research project, and we were looking for medications against tuberculosis, like resistance to tuberculosis. And uh, me and my colleagues, we were engineers, and we just wrote a software that was trying to identify candidates. And then we got a list of candidates, and the first one was like a super high quality candidate, and we were like, oh my god, the biologists will be super happy about this candidate. And then we brought them the list to our colleagues, the who were working in biochemistry, and we showed them, we find there is awesome drug candidate, and they looked at it and they were like, yeah, that's cyanide.
yeah,
I mean, the patient isn't going to die from tuberculosis for sure.
yeah. Well, I remember one of we were doing a medical course and they were talking about stopping bleeding and stuff, and then it's just like, well, all bleeding stops eventually. Like, right? Like either you stop it or it just stops. Like, the the the,
Yeah.
the trick is trying to stop it quickly. So,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, I mean, if you're
And
like, oh,
keeping
did
the
they stop the
patient alive.
bleeding? Well, if the patient dies, the bleeding stops. So, did I pass the test? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. Um, we recently had a conversation on rewrite and refactor, and that's something that I often struggle with a lot. I feel like over my career, I've kind of like went back and forth. Like I used to be very much like classic, Dunning-Kruger, I would say is probably the best description. But like you come in and you look at something, you're like, that's not the way I would write it. It must be wrong. Therefore, I'm going to rewrite the whole thing. And that just has never, well, actually, I won't say that has never ended well. I actually did do that on one project and it turned out very well. But in hindsight,
Mhm.
I look at that and I'm like, that was probably the wrong approach. Like I got lucky. So if
Mhm.
you have any comments or thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, so in general, I think that rewrite and refactor, especially like rewriting software, is rarely the first choice that I have. I'm not against rewrites, but I want to be very specific about the reason I want to rewrite and the way I do the rewrite. And one of the things that I like a couple of years ago, I noticed that there were a couple of companies that did rewrites really well. And that got me interested because at that point I was very anti rewrite. And after looking at a number of case studies, what I realized is that basically there are two factors that separate successful rewrite projects from not successful ones. And these two factors are one, we want to have a direct user value as a result of that rewrite. One of those examples would be the front end that I mentioned before. Like it was an old front end, it was almost impossible to make it reactive. And then people had to refresh the page every time they wanted to get fresh data. And then I rewrote the whole thing in React because that was the easiest way to make it possible for people to see the results immediately. You want to have a direct customer value, and the other thing is that you want to do it incrementally. So if you are going to spend months and months and months before you see the value or the outcome of that rewrite, that's not gonna pan out. But if you are doing it in a way that every single day you're you are better off as a result of that rewrite, then why not? But then you would have to use a pattern like the strangling fig pattern, where you just take over functionality from the old app
Yeah.
incrementally.
Well, let me walk you through my situation. You could tell me maybe if I was lucky or if I actually. So
Okay.
I started. It was a mining company, and they were testing soil samples. So they had this machine. They took soil samples, they put it in the machine, and it did some mixed it with some chemicals and did some chemical processing. And they had this machine. It worked, and the guy who wrote the software for it left. He became a
Mhm.
race car driver or something. He decided I don't want to do software anymore. He left. And so I
Mhm.
inherited this and I'm looking at it and it's not like the worst software ever, but it's not certainly not designed the way that I would do it.
Mhm.
And one of the things that they wanted to do, I think they had a couple things that they wanted to change, but one of the things that happened was that they had a lot of mechanical problems because they're dealing with mud and water and dirt would get on sensors and wires. So they redesigned some of the stuff. And as part of the redesign, they had to change some of the hardware. So they needed new hardware drivers. So that part needed to change. And one of
Mhm.
the changes was that they had some motors that like turned some turntables to like move things along, kind of like a conveyor belt.
Mhm.
And they had two of them, and they were separate in the old system. In the new system, it was like one motor that turned both. And
Mhm.
actually, I forget. It went one way or the other. It was either there were two before and now there's one, or I don't really remember. It's been a while. But anyway, so I was like, okay, well, you know, we need to rewrite the software, and actually proposed like an entire rewrite to them, which was probably not necessarily the right way to do it, um, but we did the iterative thing. So we did like I would write drivers for the different pieces of hardware and we would go test them and I would put them together and we would test them as we went. So I think I had that
Mhm.
incremental part down. And then yeah, that was the big thing that I remember was we kind of did incrementally. But the interesting thing though that I wanted to point out is that when you do a rewrite, there is context that you lose. Because I remember the way the software was written, it was really hard. There was some intricate timing in terms of like how much chemicals we add and how long the mixer goes and how long we let things
Mhm.
settle. And I remember standing there with the program manager, the mechanical person, the technician, and myself. And I'm like, okay, well, what does the machine do in this particular situation? And everybody had a different answer because I'm looking at the code. I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, well, I think it should do this for 30 seconds and then do this for 20 seconds and this for 10 seconds. And in the end, we
Mhm.
had to sit there with a stopwatch and time it to figure out what it was actually doing, which I thought was very interesting. Because, like, if I would have just went off of what I thought out of the code, I would have been wrong. And if I would have listened to any of them, if they would have written a requirements document and handed it to me, it would have been wrong. And so I think
Mm.
that's very interesting because, like, the other thing you hear about too is like, there's all these weird edge cases that over time that legacy system has built up calluses to.
Yeah.
And then when you go and you recreate it, it doesn't
Mm.
necessarily match.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And that kind of brings up the topic of characterization tests.
Yes.
So I really like that approach. Whenever I deal with legacy system, I usually start by writing characterization tests, and then you can bring those over to your rewrite, right? And then that basically freezes in time the behavior when you created those characterization tests. Uh, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing as well.
I was gonna say yes. That is my approach now. So like when I do like the Gilded Rose kata, I start by a characterization test and then I do everything. But if you look carefully at that particular kata, there are some corner cases that either aren't well defined in the requirements or it doesn't do what you would expect. And a buddy of mine, I think I had him on the podcast, and he talked about it. He worked for an automotive company. They were testing automotive parts, and they had a old tester, and they decided to rewrite the tester and redesign it. So he gave them this new redesigned tester,
Mhm.
and they said, "Oh well, all of a sudden, like 80% of our parts are now failing." It's
Mm.
like, "Oh, well, that's weird." So he looked at both the things. He's like, "Yeah, well, those 80% should have been failing according to your spec on the old machine, and it wasn't doing what they thought it was supposed to
Mhm.
do." And so I thought that was very interesting. So, like, yeah, the characterization part carries along all the behavior, both the good and potentially any bugs, which is always. But I am a big fan of doing that though, because at least then, as a contractor coming in, I can say, "Hey, look, when they find the bug, it does exactly what the old machine did." You're at least at parity, and then it's a lot easier to say, "Okay, if you give me some more money, I'll fix that bug too, or whatever." So
Yeah, and then sometimes there are bugs that are there for decades and no one notices. One of my favorite stories or war stories is when we were actually doing a rewrite on a system, uh, and we noticed that our characterization test was differing between the existing system and the new one. Then we noticed that there was a quite obvious bug in the code. Like it was a glaring bug. And then we looked at the subversion history because at that particular company we were using subversion, and it turns out that the bug was there for I think about 8 years without anyone noticing.
to me, that brings up a philosophical question, kind of like, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? Because, like, if there's a bug there for decades and it doesn't cause any problems, is it a problem? Right? Like for example, in this automotive thing that my brother was, yeah, those bulbs or whatever should have failed. But if the customers never noticed and never complained,
Mm.
like that, to me, that says that like whatever requirement they had, maybe that requirement wasn't that important. Or maybe
Yeah.
just adapted to it and like the bulbs failed. I think they were bulbs. I don't remember what they were, but maybe let's say they were light bulbs and the bulbs failed sooner than they should have. Well, people just adapted and it wasn't really a problem. So
Or there
that
is another
process needs.
interesting case. In this specific case, the bug that we found was that there was this email marketing software, and for a very specific corner case, when you sent an email with an offer, and then you sent a follow-up email to those people who didn't buy, that second email wouldn't go out.
Ah, so it
And
was
and
hidden.
big
Yeah.
it was basically that, and basically that could mean that for years or customers at the time were testing if sending follow-up emails would increase their sales, and they might have gotten to the conclusion that no, sending follow-up emails doesn't increase sales, which is not a correct conclusion to have. So it might be that the reason they didn't notice the bug was because they assumed that it's working, and they just got to the conclusion that whatever we are doing is not changing the metric, and not because there's a bug, but because maybe that email isn't useful.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know if you know Woody Zool, but he had a session recently where they talked about hidden things and things that are hidden and that we don't see. And that's one of the things that
Mhm.
you didn't see. You didn't see that the fact that those emails never got delivered.
Mhm.
And he was talking more in terms of like hidden work, right? So like the fact that like, you know, yeah, we got this thing out on time, but the devs worked overtime, worked more than 40 hours a week, and the management doesn't see that. And so they think, oh, well, it only takes 40 hours to do XYZ. And really it took them longer, things like that,
Yeah, yeah.
which I think is interesting because to your point, it's kind of hard to know what you don't know.
Mm.
And just because something isn't causing a problem to you, I think that goes, Llewellyn talks about like shared pain, right? If somebody else is feeling the pain, but you don't see it, it's not a problem.
Yeah, and it kind of talks to a larger problem as well, right? When like how much of what we experience is collective knowledge. And one of the experiences is what you mentioned, like I might be working really hard on something and people just don't see that I'm working on it that hard. But there's also the other side of it is like I see that or I experience something and I think it's normal, and it turns out that it's not normal. It's just that no one is telling me that it's not more normal because I'm the only one experiencing it, and I never cared to ask. Um, and then there are a couple of examples to that. Like, I see a lot of people with ADHD realizing that their experience is not normal in the sense of no, not everyone feels that way. But also, recently, I realized that a lot of people, now there are conferences that ask speakers to pay more than the participants for speaking. And if that's all your experience as a speaker, that every time you are invited to speak at the conference, you need to pay more than the attendees, then you might think that's normal when indeed it's not normal.
Yeah, it is interesting, like what you're used to. Like, for example, I do know like a lot of conferences do pay their speakers. And in our world, in the LabVIEW world, we're used to not getting paid because, this
Yep.
company that owns LabVIEW and they would have this big conference and people would go and speak there, but like they didn't have a way of paying people. And so it just kind of became normalized in our industry not to. And that's one of the things that I'm very much trying to change. I would like to get us to the point of being able to, at the very least, pay people for travel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, it's interesting. Like, so what I know is that in the motivational speaker industry, it's very usual for people to pay their way into conferences at first, uh, which I have a problem with, but that's a different story. And then you like I think in IT we usually like what I usually see is conferences at least covering the travel costs for people, even if they don't pay a speaker fee. At least the travel is covered in most cases. But then, of course, there are exceptions.
yeah, but I
Involved.
think part of it also depends too on who's putting on the conference. For example,
Mm.
if you're a there are companies that just literally put on conferences and that's all they do, and that's their business. Like if they're making money off of it, they should certainly be paying people, as opposed to
Yeah.
like conference I run. It's a nonprofit, it's a community driven thing. We don't have a ton of money. We're not. set up to make a profit. So it's a lot harder for
Yeah.
us to pay people. And I think that also, eh, like as a speaker, if I know that the people organizing the conference are getting paid, I'm a lot less concerned about me getting paid. But if those people are getting paid and I'm speaking and I'm driving value for them, then
Yeah.
there ought to be some way to charge a small amount of that.
Yeah, my rule is basically as someone who's been speaking at conferences, yeah, at least 15 years already. My policy is if you are a local conference that isn't making money off of organizing the conference, like it's community driven, or even like the admission is free for attendees,
Yeah.
that's what I'm not going to ask for anything. Like if it's a local conference, I'm gonna go. If I would have to travel, I would probably pass because I don't want to spend hundreds of euros to travel to another country and speak there when I can use
Yeah.
the same amount of effort to put out a YouTube video and then it has a much wider reach. Um, if I have to travel, then I will go to conferences that at least cover the travel costs. And then of course, like I think that in our industry there is only a handful of conferences that pay speakers, which is a shame. I think that in IT we should have a lot more paid speaking gigs.
Yeah. No. Yeah, and I mean, to your point, like the motivational speakers, like those people have figured out a way to make money because some of them make very good money doing motivational
Yeah,
speakers, the big keynote speakers.
yeah.
Although I have to say, in general, compared to IT people, they are generally much better and more polished presenters. So as IT people, we tend to be kind of introverted and not as
Mm.
charismatic. Um, so
Yeah, I think that it's not necessary. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. So I think that it's not about. I'm an introvert. I'm absolutely introvert. I really struggle in large groups, but I love and enjoy being on stage. But that wasn't like that always. Like when I started out, my first talk was a complete tragedy. Like I went on stage, I fumbled my words, I sweated and all that. Like I hated it. But over the years, I had a couple of good mentors, and by now, I really take pride in the quality of my talks. Like I've been even voted best talk of a conference twice.
yeah. It definitely is a learned thing because I agree with you. When I first started, I was very nervous and fumbled everything, and you do eventually get more comfortable with practice. Um,
Yeah, I mean it's practice and having good feedback because
mhm.
and that's the thing. Like a couple of like I think it was about like a week ago that I was in a conference in Poland, and I mentioned to one of my co-speakers that I'm uh, coaching people on speaking, and she was like, "Oh, this is my first talk ever. Can you give me feedback?" And I was like, "Sure." And what it was, it really stuck with me. What she said after I gave her feedback, like it was so useful because I was honest and didn't just tell her that it was good.
I
Like
was
I really pointed out, okay, this is where where you could have used a better metaphor. This is where you could have change your slides to be more in fact impactful. And like I gave her like I think we were talking for an hour just about that one talk. And yeah, I think that's key to having an experienced person who knows what works and what doesn't work in a conference talk aspect.
Yeah, I feel like in general, as audience members at tech conferences, we're really bad at giving good feedback. Like you said, usually it's like, "Oh, I liked your talk," or "Oh, I didn't like it," or but
Yeah.
that's like it. There's no like, we're not very good at giving constructive feedback.
And even like it also depends on how experienced you are in getting people to give you feedback. Like when someone comes to me and tells me that, oh, I liked your talk, I usually start trying to dig deeper, and
Why?
then
Why?
sometimes I can get something out of it, like something I learned from it. But that's also a skill that you have to learn how to ask the right questions, so that eventually they get over that first period where they just want to comfort you, and then they really start thinking about, okay, what was it that I particularly liked, and what was it that where I maybe felt a bit lost.
Yeah. Well, I think another interesting question is, when you say you liked it, does that mean you were entertained by it, or does that mean you actually learned something?
Oh
And those are
yes,
two
that's
different things. And also, like, either one is valid depending on the goal, right? Some conferences, getting up there and just being entertaining is like that's what I want. And some conferences, it's like, no, I want you to have my take. The other thing too, I think of, like, as a presenter, for me at this day and age, to actually get up and present something, I have to have a really good like message, and I want to have a takeaway, and I want to make sure that that takeaway actually landed. So just being like, okay,
mm,
if you had one takeaway from this, what is it? And does that line up with what my intent was? And if it
yeah.
doesn't, then it's like, oh, okay. Like and maybe it's interesting too, sometimes if they take away something different, because maybe there's some aspect there that you didn't think of.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes the questions after the talk can be extremely valuable. Like one of the talks I gave, I think it was actually the rewrite and refactor talk. And the first time I gave it, I got a question that the answer to that question made the talk so much better that every time I give it since, I feel like it's a much better talk than it was before because of that question.
yeah, yeah, I think that kind of goes to the whole, like, every talk is an experiment, and you go up there and you throw it out there and you see what sticks and what
Mm.
doesn't, and then, like, you know, make it an iterative talk of, like, over time it should evolve and get better. If you're just giving the
Yes.
same talk over and over again, I feel like you're not learning anything, I guess.
Okay. There's a bit of clarification there. I think you should give the same talk over and over again,
But it should
but
be, yeah,
iterate on it and change it every
yeah,
time.
exactly, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
giving
so one of the
is fine.
one of the dirty secrets is that I have the same talk with two different titles. Earlier, for a long time, I was giving that talk with the title "How I Learned to Love Legacy Code." And then
Ah,
at some point, as I was iterating on the talk, I realized that at some point it wasn't about me loving legacy code, but about me learning how to replace legacy code. And that was when it became how to convince the business of a big rewrite or refactor. It's the same talk. It's just that it evolved from me explaining why it's important to value the code that you have and learning to love how like learn to love working with legacy code and seeing the positives of it, to me realizing that actually I do like legacy code or love legacy code because it shows that I already have something valuable. And this piece of code is legacy code because a lot of people decided to pay for it, which means that it was useful for a lot of people. So I love that code, but I want to make it better. And then the question is, how do I make it better? So it kind of shifted, but it there wasn't a cut where this became a different talk. It was more like there was a point when I decided to rename it simply because as I was iterating on it, the message changed.
yeah, well, I think that's important. So, a couple things there. One, like, a lot depends on the audience. So if you're giving that talk to managers, that's a very different talk than giving it to developers, right? Because you're giving it to
Yeah.
developers, it might be, how do I convince my management that I need to do this? Versus as managers, when my developers come to me with this, how do I evaluate, is it worth doing this or this, and how do I help them be successful? So those are two
Yeah.
different things in two different goals.
Yeah.
And another thought that's coming to mind, I'll have to see if I can find a link. There was some series of videos, and it was a couple of years ago that I found it, by some writing professor, and basically he was like, you can't analyze writing without knowing what the goal and intention was and what who the audience was. Like, you can't just hand
Mhm.
somebody a piece of thing and say this is good bad at writing or bad writing. because
Yeah.
depending on the context. And so you can't just like look at a presentation and say, oh, this presentation is good or bad. It's more like, was it appropriate to the audience and did it achieve its goal?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the most important parts, like understanding the audience and also mm, and being clear on the message.
Yeah.
That's like you always I really like starting with like what is it that I often ask this from people I coach, like what is it, what is the way in which you want to change your audience? Like they are walking into the auditorium as one person and they are going to walk out as another person. Who is the person walking into the room and who is the person walking out of that room? And that is the thing that you need to be clear on, like both of those things.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah, I try to think. Yeah, what is the change in thinking or the change in behavior or however it is that you
Yeah.
achieve? Yeah. The other thing though I've been thinking about, and you can tell me what you think of this, but I've started thinking like a lot of the talks that I do are voluntary, right? So I'm thinking in my mind, if I'm going to do a talk, not only do I want to see a change in the audience or something, but there has to be something in it for me in the sense like I have to do talks that I actually care. Like it has to be a message that I care about.
Hmm.
Also, like, you know, I feel like having a slight sales pitch in it is actually okay, right? Like if it's done well, right? So like the example is like you go, you talk about this problem, you present a solution, and then at the end you're like, hey, if this is a problem you have, hey, I have this tool that makes it even easier. Like you can do all the manual stuff that I just showed you how to solve the problem, or you can
Hmm.
pay me or hire or in your thing, right? Like you might give a speech about public speaking. You might say, here are all the things you need to know about public speaking. If you want professional coaching and feedback, I'm available. Like that
Yeah.
to me, like there's something in it for you and there's something in it for the audience. And it's kind of like that win-win thing of like both the audience walks away with something and you get something valuable. I mean, maybe that something valuable is just exposure. Like, hey, now you know I'm here and I can solve this problem. That's good.
But that's a kind of related to something I recently understood about marketing. I always hated marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And for me it was always something that I didn't want to do for myself, and I really hated when I noticed that I'm being marketed to. It was more often it was more something I associated with like negative feelings with, and I thought that marketing doesn't work on me. And the thing that I recently learned, and I think this is probably a very valuable lesson to any engineer who wants to start their own business, is that good marketing is not necessarily about selling your stuff. Good marketing is more about teaching people why the problems that you are solving are important and helping them solve those problems even without you and making it easier for them to solve it with you.
Yeah. Well, I think to correct your original thing, you didn't like marketing. I think you didn't like poorly done marketing because
Yeah,
like
exactly.
what we consider quote marketing, like a lot of like corporate marketing is, oh, we're going to create a market for this. We're going to convince people that they need this thing.
Yeah,
And really what they should be doing is explaining, hey, here's the problem. Here's like you said, here's why it's important. Here's why it's important to solve. Here's some steps that you can take. And by the way, I can help you. Like
yeah,
that's a valuable marketing. It's and it's hard for engineers too, because I feel like a lot of engineers have this thought in their head that like I'm a really good engineer. Everybody should notice that I do really good high quality work and they should just hire me. And like that doesn't work at all. That's like you know, or I have
yeah.
this great and wonderful solution. And okay, that's great, but does it solve a problem I have? No. Okay. Like I invented the world's greatest toothbrush. Well, what problem are you actually solving? Like what problem do people have with their existing toothbrush?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and it's also I think that we kind of used to poorly done marketing, or we notice the poorly done marketing. I think that's the key. Like the well done marketing is something that you don't notice. You don't notice that you've been marketed to. In fact, you feel like you have learned something. That's well done marketing. And then
You learn something and you feel inspired to do something about it. That is the other.
yeah, and you feel like, oh, I want to work with this person.
Yes,
Like
that
this is the person I want to work with. Like
yeah.
um and that's kind of the hard part. And I think one of the things that I kind of learned the hard way is for a long time uh I've been talking at conferences a lot, and I've been organizing coach retreats and all that. And at that time, I had a lot of like spontaneous customers who just came to me and said, "Oh, I want to work with you." And I was like, "Okay, why not?" And it felt so natural. And I was like, "Oh, I should start doing marketing because there is clearly need for what I do because people are reaching out to me even when I don't do marketing." And I started doing marketing, and my sales plummet. I suddenly didn't have spontaneous customers. And here's the thing: the problem was that I started doing poorly done marketing when I already done good marketing. Now I have to go back to doing good marketing. And the really bad thing about it, or the hard thing about that, is once you realize that just sharing your knowledge without any strings attached is the best marketing. It becomes really hard to do that because now you know that it's not no strings attached because you know that you are doing this because you want to get sales, but at the same time you try to get back to that mindset when you just benevolently were sharing your knowledge. So yeah, and it's hard to get back to that mindset once you realize that this is also making you money.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing to me is always just thinking about trying to serve the customer the best, even if that means not using me, right? So like if I can give them, like sometimes
Yeah.
people ask me to do something, I'm like, well, I could do that for you and I could charge you, but there's a free resource over here that you can use that will. And sometimes I do that and they're still like, no, we want to work with you, and I'm like, great, like awesome, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes
And I guess it's even increasing the trust towards you because you just said that to that person that, hey, you don't even need me. Here's the thing that you need,
yeah.
and just go
But what I would
and
hate is for them to pay me a bunch of money and then find out later, like, oh, I could have just done it for free over here. Like, that's like a
yeah.
bad experience, right? Whereas if I send them over there and they use the free thing, they're going to remember me and they're going to say, hey, Sam knows. Next time we'll have a question, we'll go ask him. And maybe the answer
Yeah.
to the next one is, well, there is no free resource, but if you want to pay me, I'll do it. And then I have
And
the
it's
credibility.
really counterintuitive. Like a lot of people, I think, especially people in consulting, when they are entering the consulting world, they feel like they shouldn't give away all their knowledge. But here's the thing: people are not paying for your knowledge; they are
Yep.
paying for your structured knowledge.
Yep. Yeah.
And just the difference between I'm throwing out information on LinkedIn and YouTube for free and answering questions below the videos on a best effort basis, that's creating that trust of, oh, I'm learning from this person. And then when they need your help more specifically because they want to uh, achieve results faster and not by going through all of your content for
Yep.
months, they just need the one specific content that they need in their situation. That's where they are going to pay you, and that's fine.
Yeah. I'm not a huge Gary Vaynerchuk fan, but I used to listen to him. And he had a thing where he was like, give it all away for free because what happens is you outline, like, for example, setting up CI/CD stuff for LabVIEW is kind of challenging. And I have a bunch of free resources for it. They're all
Mhm.
there. And I point people to it all the time because the people who are going to go do it on their own anyway and not hire me, we're going to find that and do it anyway. And the information's out there. But my clients, what happens is they see that and they're like, oh, it establishes my expertise. Sam knows what he's doing, but that looks like a big pain in the butt. And there's a bunch of places I'm going to stub my toes and then like wandering around in the dark. Why don't I
Yeah.
hire Sam and he'll bring a lantern and he knows where I'm going to stub my toes and he can help me avoid all the little pitfalls and
Yeah.
it's going to go much smoother. And to your point, it's going to go much faster too because they're not sorting through all the information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
SAS Workshops offers a variety of live workshops each year, but now we're making them available 24/7 to you on our Thinkific site. Right now, we have Getting Started in Software Development free. getting started in Git, and a refactoring course available. The next course coming to our site is CI/CD. If you'd like to learn more, check out the show notes.
So, all right. Well, it's been a great talk. We've been going for a while, so we should probably wrap things up. Is there any last minute things that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about? I think I hit everything on my list.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, like, time flies by when we are doing this podcast. Every time I'm on a podcast, I feel like, oh, that was so much fun, and it would be so great to just continue the discussion, right?
Yeah.
But
There's
yeah,
always
I
more
don't have
topics.
anything else.
All right. Well, great. Thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.